I have a small Twitch stream that no one watches, but it will collect the video.
That's good.
Okay, I'm going to turn that on, and we're recording the audio. And Slavoj Zizek, thank you very much for coming back to the Zer0 Books podcast and to our new Twitch stream and to the video channel. And I sent you a list of questions at this before we talked, and I want to.
As a good Stalinist censor, I read in detailed your questions, and I can tell you maybe you will get a couple of years of re-education camp, but you will not go to Gulag. Good question.
Okay, thank you
very much.
Thank you. Yeah. So I want to start with the last question.
That's ingenious. I wanted to. My God, we have, if I may use these new obscurantist terms,
right.
This synchronicity of minds or whatever.
Right, because I think it's where to start. It's about, it kind of ties in with the attacks that have been perpetrated against you recently. And I think it has to do with a desire to hold off a confrontation with the real world. And so I wanted to ask you this question, which is, what do you make of Noam Chomsky's claim that we no longer have any conception of the physical world or physicality, his embrace of Mysterianism, and the idea that the hard problem of consciousness cannot be overcome by humans? And maybe, do you think that explains why his embrace of the sort of Kantian Mysterianism, it explains why he calls you a charlatan?
Probably, because as we know, for the people who come from analytic tradition, Kant is the last German philosopher in this continental tradition to be taken seriously, With Fichte and then Schelling, Hegel, Schopenhauer, it's total charlatanism, bluff, and so on and so on. Although, of course, there is much more in Kant and so on. But let me ask I really like this question. Chomsky has a point when he says the problem is not mind. Do we know what is mind? The problem is already matter. We don't have a concept of matter.
Right.
I think the answer to this is we don't need it. Science defines in its practice what counts as matter through measurement and so on and so on. Where materialism enters for me is just with 2-3 additional totally formal features. First, and the same thing matters to how ideas are. Even ideas can be something conceived in a materialist way. That this process is blind, it's a process of blind interaction, not organized, run by any higher teleological, purposeful intelligence, and so on. It's just a blind, stupid process. That's the point for me. That's what defines materialism. Idealism, on the contrary, always presupposes some kind of, even if it's brutally vitalist, like life force, some kind of deeper controlling agency. I believe in this blind stupidity of natural processes, which, and I enjoy it, can be totally abstract. You don't find any chunks of matter, small pieces of matter running around. But second point,
let me just interject. Can I interject
please.
Your question? For Zizek, what is material is the same as what is contingent. It's blind, unstructured, meaningless, chaotic. Conversely, Zizek says that what is idealist is what is structured, caused, and I think necessary. This is, to me, sort of the opposite of what Chomsky says.
But you see, you can't ask the question about interaction between physical and non-physical until you tell us what physical means. But there hasn't been any concept of physical for hundreds of years. The physical these days are things that Newton would have regarded as total absurdities, like curved space-time. How can that be physical? Quantum entanglement. I mean, Einstein regarded that as non-physical because it's so absurd. But now scientists just accept it. Physical is just anything we more or less understand. And if that's the only notion of physical we have, there can't be interaction between physical and non-physical. Non-physical will be all the things we don't understand.
I think what Zizek is doing is this. He's starting an Hegelian immanent critique of Kant's notion of the noumenal. That is, the noumenal isn't some mystery outside of our perception, but is just a mess of chaotic, contingent, and undifferentiated stuff. It isn't even coherent enough to form little chunks of atoms, not in its most basic form. That is, it is precisely the gap or the impossibility of our own perception. And we see it and understand it as that impossibility. However, it seems to me that by labeling matter as this contingent stuff, Zizek has maybe brought it into relation with subjectivity or mind in such a way as that it now relies on the presence of mind on some level.
So when I was a kid, there was a commercial on TV for Reese's peanut butter cups, and when someone would be walking along and they'd have a bar of chocolate, and the other person would have a jar of they'd have a bar of chocolate and a jar of peanut butter, and they'd run into each other, and the chocolate would get into the peanut butter, and they'd say, "Your chocolate is in my peanut butter," and the other one would say, "Your peanut butter is in my chocolate." I feel as though when you talk about materialism the way you are, that your idealism gets into your materialism.
I see your point. Yes. Yeah. But first, I don't see how you can oppose here materialism and idealism, because I think exactly the same thing can also be said for the ideal universe. Mm-hmm. It's in the same way constructed, it has a structure, and it's chaotic. And that's what I think Hegel enables us to think. In some sense, the structure of chaos itself, how order evolves out of chaos. Never forget, now I hope we are not boring our public too much. Now we are at a high abstract conceptual level, but never forget that Hegel does not begin his logic with God or supreme idea or whatever, but with the notion of being, which is pure chaotic multiplicity. And out of this totally flat chaotic multiplicity, that's the point of his logic, some kind of structure gradually emerges. But if I may say another thing, where I am disturbed by this idea of mysterialism in the sense of our human mind, by definition, because of our genetic evolutionary limitations, cannot understand itself. This is an old argument. You find it with Chomsky, Malkin, but you also incidentally find it with Steven Pinker and
Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson makes the same argument.
But I think I have a good counterpoint here, a very simple one. Mm-hmm. Steven Pinker, I forgot where it's quoted, where I refer to him in one of my big fat books. Mm-hmm. Steven Pinker gives this example. We cannot understand how our mind works for the same reason that I think uses it, maybe I'm wrong, a rabbit cannot understand differential calculus. Simply, rabbit's mind, brain, whatever, I don't know how his self-awareness functions, didn't need this for evolutionary reasons, for survival and so on. It's not part of rabbit's life world. So, of course, it cannot understand it. And Pinker's argumentation is, it's the same for us. Our mind developed for work, instrumental reasoning, or for intersubjectivity, seduction, cooperation, and so on, not for understanding itself. So, it's a simple evolutionary explanation. It was not needed, it's not the focus of our mind to understand it.
Right.
I find this parallel totally misleading because, a rabbit also does not worry about differential calculus. It's totally outside its domain. While isn't it mysterious that we, humanity, as far as we know, from the very beginning, even before there were sciences, at least in the modern sense, are asking ourselves impossible questions, questions that we, genetically, evolutionary, whatever, are unable to properly understand. So now I'm making my usual Hegelian trick. Of course, there are questions that we cannot answer. But why then are we, in contrast to animals or whoever, answering them all the time? Why are we precisely obsessed with impossible questions? Why do we need a mystery? Because for a rabbit, there are in some sense no mysteries. Okay, unexpected things can happen for a rabbit. Mm-hmm. Some animal jumps on him, human, a gun shot by a human being kills him, but these are not in a proper human sense a mystery, like mysteries for us, mystery of the universe, mystery of love, and so on and so on. So I would say, in a little bit more subtle way, that it's not simply that we cannot understand human mind, but that this not understanding is, in the strongest possible sense, part of the positive definition of the human mind. Mm-hmm. Human mind means, this is what I put it in my Lacanian jargon, that it emerges out of its own impossibility. Even all that it's dealing with impossible dilemmas, problems, even if you look historically, it's interesting to see how it was not that first we are dealing with facts, science, and so on, and then we start to speculate. No, we first start to speculate.
Right.
Cosmology, what is the nature of the stars, blah, blah. And then gradually, as a secondary effect of these positive sciences emerge. And it's a good question. Here I'm not against Chomsky. Maybe he would even agree with it. It's a good question to what extent, although there is no foundation.
I want to interject here.
Interrupt me.
So,
Go on. Yes, no
I want to go. This is a tangent, but it's just a sort of I want you to speculate on like an alternative history. If Hegel and Kant had debated, do you think that Kant would have called Hegel a charlatan? Do you think they would have been able to?
Absolutely. He already did it, not with Hegel, but the first conflict was the passage from Kant to Fichte. Mm-hmm. And Kant, okay, he didn't use the term charlatan, but more or less something similar. But again, what is crucial here is that, that's why I'm so obsessed about this, and in all my last books, I agree with my critics here. I'm struggling with the same problem. I'm rewriting the same book. What does Hegel with Kant? Hegel is not a naive idealist who says, oh, now I know the last mystery of the universe or whatever, now I know it, the thing itself, and so on and so on. Right. No, what Hegel does is just, he accepts the Kantian fundamental, let's call it impossibility. We cannot know the thing in itself and all that. Mm-hmm. He just claims that this structure is, if I may use naive terms, inscribed into reality itself.
Right.
That reality itself is structured through constitutive impossibilities, absentials, and so on and so on. It's a very complex topic. You know, here, unfortunately for my detractors, I'm not bluffing here. I know very well I'm saying.
Yeah.
So this is the Hegelian speculative moment. That's why I think Hegel is not a crazy. Hegel is, for me, this may sound shocking, a very modest philosopher. He is not saying, I know everything, there are no mysteries, I'm reading the mind of God, and so on and so on. What Hegel is just very attentive to is how Hegel is, to cut a long story short, Hegel, and this brings us to your first question, correlationism, the thing in itself, and so on and so on. Hegel is not saying there are no things in themselves, everything emerges through our subjectivity and so on. But what Hegel is saying is that this Kantian opposition between phenomena and the thing in itself is, and it's clear if you read Kant closely, it's absolutely immanent to phenomena, in the sense that the thing in itself is something that appears as such in our phenomenal experience. I experience that there is something out there which is out of my grasp.
What I want to do...
Sorry, just to finish, because this is a crucial point. Hegel's point would have been, there is no mystery in nature. As I always repeated, okay, there are mysteries in the sense that we don't know. But nature, usually the Kantian problem is this is how things appear to us. Who knows? We cannot know how they are in themselves.
Right.
Hegel, as you probably know, I repeat this point all the time, Hegel turns around this enigma. He said, things are. So what? They stupidly exist out there. The big enigma is not, can we step out of our phenomenal experience and see how things are in themselves? The big problem is, why do things appear? How can, in the middle of positive being, reality, something like appearance arise? Which is why, in very precise terms, Hegel always celebrates the notions of fiction, appearance. For example, he says, Hegel, in the famous passage in his Forward to Phenomenology, that the greatest strength of human spirit is the ability to tear apart what is in reality always together, to abstract things, to break the natural unity, and so on, which means to introduce appearances. And that's why even I had recently in London, something that may attract our listeners, we had a debate on sexuality, Mm-hmm. And I said, are we aware how our basic, at least for most of us, there are special cases of perversion, I will not enter into that, but what a kind of a violent force of abstraction does sexual experience involve? Look, I'm with my lover of whatever sex, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I hold him, her, it naked in my arms. I explore it. But if sexuality is to work, I have to abstract from so many things.
Right.
This my old example already from medieval times, if you were too much obsessed with sexuality, they tell you, just imagine what is 1 inch beneath the skin of vagina or penis. It's dirty, glands, the penis can smell of urine, and so on and so on. Once you're in sexuality, you have to abstract all this. And I claim this brutal abstraction in the sense that the libidinal object is always an appearance. Appearance in the sense that you abstract a whole... when you are holding your lover in your hand, you abstract all the bodily details or whatever biological details.
Yeah.
It's a very reductive experience.
Yeah.
That's what Hegel celebrates. It's precisely, for Hegel, the greatest strength of humanity is precisely, it sounds paradoxical, but it is this unique ability to fall into an illusion, to take an illusion seriously. It's not the opposite. It's not reality. Animals can deal with reality, no problem. We humans are ready to risk our lives for appearances.
Yeah. I want to reframe this a little bit, but I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just want to clarify it because...
When you say this, it's what in psychoanalysis we call Verneinung, denegation. So kill me directly.
I just want to reframe it because what happens is I feel like I understand what you're saying, but then these problems remain. So for instance...
Which, tell me, be precise.
Okay, I'll tell you. For me, I still am wondering to what degree what we take to be reality or the objective world relies on our own subjectivity and vice versa.
It does what we here.
Let me finish the question.
I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah. So the question is, I'll put it to you like this: when I imagine the world, I had an experience when a few years ago when I was a younger man, when my uncle died. I realized that it was a little bit strange that the world was going on without him, because he was that somehow some part of the world had disappeared. And then I imagined, well, what if I was gone? And I thought, well, the whole world would be gone, right? This is our dilemma. But then you want to believe in a world outside of yourself.
My difficulty at this point in the interview is this one. If the objective, contingent, chaotic world does appear to us, and I agree with Zizek that it does, then isn't this material world, in a Kantian sense, a category of our perception? If this is so, then haven't we embraced idealism? Anyhow, this is what is bothering me at this point in the interview, and I try to ask Zizek about it by referencing the notion of solipsism. I'm grasping at this issue of the reality of our subjectivity, the way that ontologizing the split between the objective and the subjective, or the idea that reality is incomplete in itself, may lead us to idealism. I'm trying to state this difficulty as baldly as possible, and I think Zizek picks up on what I'm driving at.
And you talk about this in terms of the transcendent horizon, or the transcendent...
Yeah, but here I would have been much more, not in a traditional sense, but nonetheless materialist and Marxist.
Yeah.
If I, in the sense that, it's not our isolated consciousness.
Right.
It is something that is formed through collective symbolic interaction, through collective practice, and so on and so on. This is how I read Zer0 Books' famous statement that nature is a historical category. He was not a subjective idealist.
Right.
His point was only that whenever we imagine nature, and precisely the way you mentioned it now, as if I disappear, what remains, and so on, that is always a historical product. It's overdetermined by our historical practice. And you can show it in a triumphant way if you look at the history of natural sciences. We know the story. It's in very rough terms. In medieval times, even in Renaissance still, meaning was part of reality. Reality was perceived as something which has, even if it's chaotic meaning, but some type of deeper meaning inscribed into it. It's only with modernity, after Renaissance, Descartes and so on, that this clear opposition emerged. Reality is out there. Pascal wrote about this vast, silent universe, endless, no meaning in it. And meaning is something that we humans bestow on it. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying that this is then this notion of nature as meaningless, run by some abstract mechanisms, natural laws. This is a typical modern phenomenon. Now comes my point.
Okay.
I'm not saying that so we cannot step out of our collective human universe. I'm just saying that the way is not to try to abstract from ourselves and to say, okay, this notion in science still betrays human influence touch. Let's try to abstract from it, and then you get some totally abstract notion and so on and so on. No, you can show it pretty convincingly that all natural scientific basic visions of reality are socially overdetermined. But now I repeat it. I'm not saying that this means that they are simply not true, that they are our collective idealist dream and so on.
Right.
All I'm saying is that if you want to ask radically the question, so how are things in themselves? Do not ask the question in this way, and that's for me the limit of correlationism. This is where, as you put it in one of your questions, correlationists like Kant and Graham Harman and other new realists, speculative realists, they share this presupposition. We are here, reality is out there. The point is, can we get at it or not. I reject this alternative, not in some stupid Hegelian way. Everything is created by our mind and so on and so on.
Right.
But I think that the true problem is not how is reality without us, but how we are part of reality. And I don't mean this as an empirical question. I don't mean this as an evolutionary question. How did human mind emerge out of... I mean it in a more radical sense, like how could something like self-awareness, like this very transcendental horizon and so on, how could this have happened in reality, in what we vaguely can call objective reality? So there, in a more perverted sense, I agree with those mysterians or whatever you call them.
Yeah.
But I would say that mystery is not out there. You try to erase yourself from the picture and then imagine reality in itself, how it is. This is typical human procedure because the whole image is already structured through the paradoxes of your mind and so on and so on. The problem is the old problem of German idealism. How reality, if we vaguely use this term for technical reasons, I prefer the Lacanian notion of the real, how the real is structured so that something like human consciousness, something like our symbolic universe of illusions and so on can emerge in it. The mystery is here. The true mystery is not reality in itself. The true mystery is ourselves. How are we part of reality?
I feel like there's two ways to understand what you're saying.
Yes?
We could understand it as you asking, how is it, from the perspective of the natural sciences, how is it that the world that we take to be the physical universe could be such that subjectivity could arise in it? There's that question. And then there's a question.
Yeah, I know. This is the so-called soft anthropic principle.
Right.
You are not... The strong version is, of course, we all reject it. The strong version is that the world was created to enable the rise of consciousness.
But there's a second way to take the same point that you're making, which is this, which is how is the social world, where we already are including ourselves in it, such that we understand ourselves as we are. That's another way to as we understand ourselves. In other words, we understand ourselves, say, as liberal bourgeois subjects, or we understand ourselves as whatever. So there are two different kinds of...
I agree with you, but I would nonetheless like to add something.
Okay.
First, this transcendental question for me is not the ultimate horizon so that we can say, so that we can simply say, whatever we are saying, it's overdetermined by our symbolic horizon or whatever, we cannot step out of it. I'm only saying that to step out of it means not to step out of ourselves, but again, to try to conceptualize, maybe it's an impossible task, what kind of a gap do we humans introduce into nature? And, here I come to your point, I think so, and how should the nature be structured in itself, let's say, so that such a gap is possible? Here comes to simplify it for my readers, my fascination with quantum physics, because what I find so beautiful in quantum physics is that in our usual understanding of the world, where we oppose human mind and reality, we see many things as specific to human, like reality is flat, stupid, it happens or not. In human mind, we can make experiments, we can deal with alternate realities, we can change things retroactively, of course, only counterfactually, the symbolic level, and so on and so on. But in some sense, the reason of my mega fascination with quantum physics is that it shows how features that we usually identify with the functioning of human spirit are in a subtly different way. I'm not saying everything is in spirit, but in some subtle way, are already in natural reality at its most elementary level. That would be the limit of my speculation. Topics like, superposition, retroactively changing the past, all those mystery of quantum experiments.
Yeah.
The most beautiful point of them is that it's not only, and quantum physics, I'm well aware, is precisely not some stupid subjectivism where we observers create reality and so on.
Yeah.
But the most subtle paradox emerges there, where not only something is established in its positive being as part of our reality only through measurement, but that this works also retroactively, so that through measurement you determine what already happened. Now, what I find again so fascinating here is that we think that this happens only in our human mind. As you must know, I always quote T.S. Eliot, who said, with every new work of art, the entire past history of art is changed. Of course, we shouldn't take this in a brutal material sense, like we are changing the past factually. But we are changing it counterfactually. It acquires a different meaning and so on and so on. And again, what I found so fascinating is that something along these lines, but not the same as in human mind, already happens at the most elementary level of reality described by quantum physics. Why is this important? Because to return back to Chomsky's question, this means that if we follow, no relativity theory, but in quantum physics and so on, we can see that the way they describe reality, it has nothing to do with our common sense notion of reality as, pieces of matter moving in linear time, space, and so on and so on. It's something much more paradoxical and so on. And this would have been, for me, true materialism.
Do you think that if, let's say that we changed the horizon of our being politically, in other words, let's say there was a revolution, we have socialism, we live in a completely different kind of society, would that change the way we understand the kinds of facts that we've already found in the natural sciences?
It's already happening.
Yeah.
It's already happening. There are good, although I'm not at the utmost a historicist, I think that every historicism is ultimately self-contradictory in the sense that it has a certain meta-theory implied into it, which itself cannot be historicized. Let me give you an example. This is my old problem with somebody whom I otherwise appreciate. He is a great mind, Judith Butler. She is an anti-essentialist. We don't have fixed sexual identities, biologically or theologically determined. Our gender identities, gender is not the same as sex, but let's drop it now. Our gender identities are performatively enacted, contingent, through practice, through repetition, and so on and so on. Okay, my simple question for her is this dynamic, performative vision of our gender identities, is this itself a historical phenomenon? That's how we experience ourselves in today, postmodern global capitalist universe? Or can we say in some sense that, to be slightly but benevolently ironic, when the stone men seduced each other and whatever they did as their sexual activity, they were already performatively constructing their identity and so on and so on. If you adopt and whichever way you answer, I think you are in a deadlock. If you claim, no, this is our specific vision today, then what will you say then? That once essentialism was true, only today it's not. If you only today it's not or not. If you say essentialism was never true, then you find yourself in a very strange predicament, which is idealist in the worst sense, I think, because then you have to claim that we, in a very primitive historicist way, that something is universally true, sex, gender, identity were always performatively constructed in a contingent way. But today we are in a privileged position to know this. So again, what interests me with all historicists is that they are never fully historicists. The very structure of historicity is something that they have to presuppose as an a priori.
I don't think we quite resolved the question of idealism, but I do think that I ended up siding with Zizek here against myself. If I try to imagine what Zizek is getting at, I think of Ryan Reynolds in the movie The Nines, which is a movie I mentioned in the last video I made. I want to explain how the solipsistic ego becomes an abstract and alienated substance in a more accessible way by taking up the dialectics of Ryan Reynolds in the 2007 film The Nines. In the movie The Nines, Reynolds plays three characters that are really one character. He plays a man who's not really a man at all, but some kind of god. In the film, Reynolds slowly realizes that the world he's in is a world of his own creation, a world that he is ultimately responsible for, but also a world that, since it is his creation, isn't real. Once the realization fully sets in, what happens is that a new world, a divine world filled with gods, is revealed to him. What Zizek is asking me to consider is that this movie, The Nines, could be made just like it is, but at the end, Reynolds wouldn't be proven out to be a god, and there would be no divine realm. That is, what if the world is incomplete? What if we're all responsible for our own phenomenal world, but there is no organic substrate? The truth of The Nines, from Zizek's perspective, isn't this idea of the divine realm that emerges in a new age way at the end, but the dissolution of reality. The mystery in our own experience, of our own being in nature, is what Zizek is driving at. I grok this, but I don't fully understand it. When it comes to Zizek's point on historicism, though, I think I do understand. He was arguing that either the cavemen were determined by their essence, and somehow we are not determined by our essence, or the cavemen's essence was their orientation towards performing gender roles or creating gender, but they didn't know this, and today we do know it. In both cases, there's a kind of idealism. One is the idealism that supports a natural essence creating natural genders, and the other is an essence of our creative capacity to perform new genders. This second choice would mean that we are historically situated in a privileged position to know our essence, whereas our caveman ancestors were not. As a Marxist, I'm ready to embrace this second form of idealism because I think capitalism creates the conditions wherein we are in a privileged position to take rational charge of the social relations that set up our political, economic reality.
The very structure of historicity is something that they have to presuppose as an a priori. It's obvious with Marx and Marxism. For there, the process which determines or over-determines the change from one to another notion of reality is ultimately the change in collective practice, collective labor process, and so on.
Right.
For Heidegger, it's different, and so on and so on. So again, I am not a radical historicist. I am, to put it very naively, in search of the absolute. I don't think that radical historicism works as a position.
Well,
Sorry,
what if the absolute is the way in which a subject interacts with and transforms the objective world?
That's nice to say, but do you know that all the terms that you used now are already so heavily historically overdetermined? What do you mean by objective world? Do you mean it in modern sense? Do you mean it in a more medieval science and so on? Is this objective world the world of natural sciences?
Well, the world you have to change in order to find something to eat. The world that you have to change in order to get a shelter from the elements.
Here I would again be tempted to complicate. If there is something, and it's a paradox, here I find mysteries, not only Chomsky.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, even when they were starving and so on, humanity had a weird need to make, under quotation marks, irrational sacrifices. You almost don't have enough of meat, but you have to destroy as an offering to gods a little bit of it, and so on and so on. This always fascinated me, there are even ridiculous examples, like, I think this is modern theology. Do you know a little bit of, it's horrible, the history of communist Albania after World War II, Enver Hoxha? You know that he was obsessed by security, and you know that in a country of, I think, less than 2 million people, in a decade or so, as part of this obsession that Albania will be attacked, they built, the Albanians, 400,000 small bunkers. It was clearly a sacrificial gesture.
Yeah, but I kind of feel like, but we have something similar under capitalism, right? We have, what we sacrifice ourselves to is the value that we're creating that's completely abstract and that mediates our life, and I feel as though that we can see.
Although, you know, my problem here is, and I claim even Marx here is ambiguous. Okay, I agree, but never forget that for Marx, the only way to freedom, actual freedom, what he called, goes through capitalism.
Right.
That Marx was always ambiguous towards capitalism. At the same time, he celebrated capitalism as this dissolution of all old patriarchal links and so on and so on. So for Marx, this, how do I call it? This, the fact that, I put it like this, the fact that for Marx, in capitalism, production doesn't serve the needs of real people, but its own capital's reproduction. For Marx, this is already an inverted form of freedom, because as Marx says, in communism, or however you imagine it, production will not serve the needs of the people, but will be a self-goal, something, an affirmative process, and so on and so on.
Right.
So let's not make this fateful, pragmatic step and claim we need production which serves the needs of the real people. On the other hand, what are the needs of the real people? Here I buy a little bit of psychoanalysis and so on. The whole capitalism relies on the structure of envy. It's not just what we have and need. It's how what we have is overdetermined by what others have. We want what others want, and so on and so on. That's why my good friend who is a Marxist, Frederick Jameson, said that if we even imagine a post-capitalist order, the biggest problem there will be envy. Okay, but
I think you're not wrong, but I think that the kind of envy that we would experience in a post-capitalist world would be the kind of envy that you experience maybe between academics on a university campus, which would mean be vicious but not deadly, and that there would be the kind of envy that you find amongst free people, and like for me what Marx points to, the way I interpret Marx, and partly through you, by the way, is that that what we're looking for is to take responsibility for the mechanism that mediates our productive life. And not that we're going to find one that's naturally there for us already, not that we are going to know what what we need already, but just that we're going to be able to be free to experiment with another mediating force in the world. And, you do have to go through capitalism to get there, because that's what's liberated us from previous autocratic or monarchical powers, so that we can work together as free people. But we're not going to find anything waiting for us where, it's just naturally
No, I agree, but I would nonetheless be a little bit more pessimist and claim that, there are serious problems here how to imagine this new mode. Even with Marx, you often find in many famous passages in late Marx in Grundrisse and Capital, what I'm tempted to call this technocratic temptation, that communism will be a self-transparent society where some collective reason will perfectly, in a transparent way, regulate our exchange with nature and so on and so on. What shocks me is that read that subchapter from Capital Volume 1 on fetishism and its mystery, whatever, when Marx, very strangely enumerating different modes of production, begins with Robinson, one guy along. Okay, let's forget about the fact that it's strangely ignored by Marx that Robinson was not alone. He had a servant
right.
on that island. And then at the end, Marx says, let's try to imagine. He means basically a communist society. And he said, we are back at Robinson. Only instead of one person, we have the collective mind. I doubt that this is possible.
Yeah.
I believe in, let's call it, constitutive opacity of the social space. That's the lesson of
I just think that what we have to do is recognize the hope is not to, maybe I do disagree with Marx on that point that you just raised, but the hope is to recognize our own responsibility for creating the gap that you talk about, for creating whatever the kind of unreal thing is that's mediating our lives. I wrote a book, a novel, where I tried to figure this out, and I decided that rather than productive work, what would in labor time, what would I had an AI impose on the world that that everyone would play video games, and what would decide where things went was what video games were most popular. And
they that's a wonderful vision. Just my evil imagination.
Well, it was a dystopian novel.
How will the space of video games be regulated? By a company
by an AI that's trying to understand itself, and it comes across as a dystopian novel. It was my attempt to overcome capitalism, and every single reviewer said thought it was dystopian.
No, my problem with AI, artificial intelligence, it's not that it's perfect, it could control us, but that it can get in its own contradictions, it can get self-contradictory, it can be inconsistent, and so on. Right. I don't believe in some perfect artificial intelligence, which will be a threat to us. I think artificial intelligence will be also inconsistent, confused, and so on.
Right. I just think we can be inconsistent in a better, more open and free way, and where people don't starve.
Okay, but would you then make the next step, which is for some leftists very problematic?
Yeah.
What if I say that the lesson of all this is that we need a certain degree of alienation. Of course, not in the Marxist sense of exploitation and so on, but in the simple sense of intersubjective distance, non-transparency, and so on and so on. And I would even...
Listen, you indoctrinated me. I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I even would have follow your lines here, and in the sense of... it's horrible when I say this. I was even a couple of times interrupted by booing, but when I said, I don't want to live in a society where every afternoon I have to sit in meetings and determine how we organize health, education, and so on. Yeah. I want some relatively efficient, anonymous, collective apparatus, state on the apparatuses or not, which take care of this. And I would say, following you, if I got you correctly, that we should imagine an alienation in this elementary sense. Life is not simply self-transparent and so on, which can be absolutely different from capitalist alienation.
Right.
The big enigma for me, it may sound very ironic today, is to imagine a different good alienation.
Yeah, that's how I'm with you on that. But I just think that we have to start by understanding the one we have, and that is one based on capitalist exploitation.
But here, again, my fascination with Marx is that, Marx, as I again and again repeated, Marx is not, this is where I find the full actuality of Marx. Marx is not simply saying, we live in a phantasmagorical universe of capitalist illusions. We need to turn to reality. No, Marx was well aware that the true fantasies, theological mysteries that control us are part of our social reality. So Marx didn't say we have to step out of illusions into social reality. No, again, the way I read Marx, I always repeat this. Fetishism is not in our false consciousness. Fetishism is in our social practice. An average bourgeois subject thinks commodity is a simple thing. We exchange things, money gives the right value. And then Marx says, literally, I quoted this passage tens of times, that a commodity appears something obvious, simple. You need very profound analysis to see what Marx ironically refers to as the theological dimension of it.
Right.
So Marx is not saying we should step out of these illusions into some kind of naive, transparent reality and so on and so on.
Yeah.
I think that this is a vulgar reading of Marx.
I think we've arrived at a point that I want to get to, which is trying to explain the attacks on you based on what the aims of the left are currently and why your message and what you say sometimes more and more recently seems to fall on deaf ears or on people who are intentionally misinterpreting you. And I think it has to do with a desire to make their politics already fit into the world as it is, and also make it into a kind of return to a state of nature. Those two things aren't as opposed as you might, as it might appear.
No, I deeply agree with you here, but I may be even more of a pessimist. For example, let's take feminism, Me Too, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
I simply don't get it. How is it possible for me to be so often attacked for anti-feminism and so on and so on? What I see in the predominant mode of political correctness and Me Too, it's not what some libertarian critics are reproaching it for, that it's too radical. No, it's really not radical enough. It doesn't even mention it. Ignores the true horrors of exploitation of women and so on and so on. My big obsession is not you are a movie star and you had to sleep with the producer to get the role, these usual stories. You know who is my ideal here? You know the actress Kirsten Stewart?
Yes.
She gave recently, I think, to the Vogue magazine, a nice interview where she made the same point. She said, forget about these aspiring movie stars. Just make a step back. Go to any studio, all those script girls, secretaries, makeup girls, and so on. They are massively exploited, and it's sexual, and it's part of their daily life. We don't even mention this. Or my other big example. Why is Me Too so obsessed with this, what I call one-night stand problems? You know, did you misuse the girl if you lied to her when you flirted with her, whatever? What about the true misery of hundreds of millions of women? Let's say you are in mid-30s. You have 2 children, you depend financially on your husband. Your husband maybe it's not even beating you. He is not rude towards you. But he starts to ignore you and there is no way out for you. Where can you go? You know, that's for me true despair. I mean, this is what has to be addressed. This massive misery, poverty, which you don't find many things in the media. But the last thing that I want to emphasize here is my Freudian and Hegelian lesson. I don't share this, I call it Me Too optimism, that if we get rid of, and then the enemy can be male chauvinism, heterosexual logic, and so on, if we just get rid of this force of oppression, we will get free sexual life, fully enjoying ourselves. No, sorry. I think we should learn something from Freud. Sexuality is inherently contradictory, self-destructive, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And we have to admit this and to learn to deal with it in a different way.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
obsession.
I don't even want this free, perfect sex, because it would become, once you try to imagine it, it becomes flat and boring. It's the fact that
You know what it becomes? I read another feminist. There are many intelligent feminists. I admire them, much more than men. One of them says, I forgot who, something wonderful, that if you follow this politically correct, consensual sex, all the stuff, these politically correct instructions, the image of good sex that you get, it gets uncannily close to sadomasochist contact. That's the model.
Right. Yeah.
Because, for example, when I criticized this logic of consent, I was attacked for, so we can rape women and consent doesn't matter. No, my point is not consent doesn't matter. Of course, I am for consent. Right. But my point is consent doesn't, my God, if there is a thing that we learned from Marx, is that the bourgeois exchange exploitation is also, by definition, the free consent.
Right.
That consent is not enough. You can still have coercion, domination, even in the form of consent. And this goes especially for sexuality, with all its provocations, ambiguities. You say yes, then you are afraid of it. You want to withdraw. Or you say no, everything is possible in sexuality. Or you say no, but it's meant as a provocation for further seduction and so on and so on. Let's admit this incredible ambiguity, gray zone complexity of sexuality. Let's not play the game. Sexuality is in itself a domain of pure joy, and then comes the evil patriarchal ideology which is that.
Right. I feel like what happened is that we had this theoretical conversation, and then we had this political conversation, and they almost met, they almost connected, but not quite.
But they do connect. I deeply agree with you because, and here I wouldn't say an optimist, but a partisan of the opinion that we live in a very interesting era where abstract questions about what is subjectivity, agency, sexual identity, and so on are at the same time part of our everyday political, social problems. That's why I like so much the debate, and this may surprise you or some of our listeners, how often I get positive signals from, I know many of them, from LGBT plus women, especially again and again after a talk. I get approached by them and they told me they especially like this idea of mine, which is not mine. I took it from an Australian feminist not LGBT. This idea that LGBT plus, that this plus is a positive entity in itself, which defines subjectivity. You know how many authentic LGBT, authentic for me, subjects accept this fully. And this is what gives me hope. Isn't it wonderful when a very concrete debate, LGBT plus rights, which can be then very empirical, separate toilets or whatever you want, all of a sudden, in a unique short circuit, brings us to the mega-theoretical, mega-philosophical problem of what is subjectivity, agency, and so on and so on.
Well, here's my hope, Slavoj, and I think we're maybe wrapping it up here, but one day after the revolution, we can, have a drink in Siberia together.
Absolutely. And even if it's Gulag, we will enjoy it there. Nice hot tea and so on. But seriously, it's very good that you mentioned revolution, because you know what I think? And Alain Badiou gave to me this idea. No, what's happening today, it's not like before World War II. It's more, unfortunately, before World War I.
Yeah.
The second half of 19th century was like our era the last 60 years. It was an era of unprecedented progress, women's vote, trade unions, retirement, and so on. And then something happened unimaginably, First World War. And that's my answer to those who claim, communists or fascists, they are the same, they screwed it up. No, if you look at the history of 20th century, you know that First World War was the mega catastrophe. Millions, it was such a shock for. And what I am afraid is that now our epoch is in a similar way approaching some, I don't know how it will look, catastrophe. We have full reasons to be like moderately, not to lose nerves, but to be, if I may use the stupid terms, to adopt the stance of rational, reasonable panic.
Okay, this is it. This is my last question. I remembered something that I had wanted to bring up at the beginning and didn't, which is last night before to get ready to talk to you, I watched a video of you from 10 years ago. You're on a pretty interesting program where you're surrounded by television sets. I think it was a Swedish program, but
It was Dutch. It was Netherlands Dutch. Yes, I know which one you mean.
Yeah.
I hated it because it was too much of a TV show and so on.
But there was interesting nonetheless because there was you made at one point which at the time was very important to make in 2009, which was that when we talk about the financial crisis, we tend to talk about bad bankers, or we tend to talk about greed or the loss of values or psychological issues, and we don't talk about the way capitalism itself has and its structure has set up the crisis and is going to continue to set up these sorts of crises. And if we want to address,
absolutely, but if I may conclude with another provocation, that's also where I would shift the accent. What disturbs me, although Trump is a disgusting entity, but I don't like this focus on impeach Trump. The problem today, if we learned something through Snowden, WikiLeaks, and so on, is that the problem is not individuals who are corrupted. The problem is the evil, manipulation, domination inscribed into the very functioning of our institutions. So even if you don't have a corrupted guy, you may have sincere patriots and so on, but still horrors will happen. Right. I don't like this false personalization. You see Trump is a corrupted guy. No, it's false. The evil, alienation, domination, is inscribed into the very functioning of our institutions. That's why, to return to you, something like a revolution, a radical change of institutions themselves will have to happen.
Do you think that the left, the radical left, the left that's supposed to still care about something like a revolution, just failed to hold on to?
My sad idea is that many of them that I've met, that secretly, intimately, they don't really believe in it. They themselves, they are the ultimate beautiful souls. It's very easy today to have this position of, no, all these are compromises, who is Bernie Sanders, a moderate social democrat, this is not enough, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But de facto, this means you just sit back and comfortably await the big revolutionary event, which you even secretly hope it will not happen. That's why with all my radicality, blah, blah, I was always also, in some sense, very pragmatic. Whenever something is moving, Syriza at the beginning, Morales, I was even connected with Linera was my ideal, Morales, Bernie Sanders, and so on. We have to join the ranks when we see a potential of some change, even if it appears naive and so on and so on.
Don't you think we have to do that?
Right to, sorry?
And don't you think we have to do that critically? Though we have to do that,
Of course, but we have to do it.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be afraid to dirty our hands, not with crimes, but with concrete engagements, which even may appear naive and so on, but they are necessary because I believe that, of course, you know what, I think Orwell, whom I otherwise don't like too much, he said at some point that all revolutions fail, but they don't fail in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think this is important. Let's imagine today, I'm worried, or today, next week, Corbyn, the elections in England. I think that Corbyn cannot win. But if it will win, probably there will be mega troubles, capital will escape and so on and so on. But there is no other way than to go through all this.
My spies in London are more optimistic. They say he has like a 50% chance of getting a minority government, not...
Okay, but what will happen then? I spoke with my friends there who are close to Corbyn, to Corbyn. And then they told me, but wait a minute, what will you do with capital already getting ready to flow out?
They'll have to he'll be smashed unless there's a popular movement in the streets, unless there's people who are willing to fight for helping his agenda get through unless he can organize.
I hear problems for him again, because first, what they would have, it will be a matter of their survival to control the free flow of capital. That's what will have to be done. You know, and how to do it with all the opposition. You know what's my ultimate paranoia? You know that true conservatives, like every 20, 30 years, something close to radical left taking power, and then 1 year fiasco, so that, as they always tell me, the people will learn the lesson then, you know. It will have peace for the next 30 years. I was already afraid of in the case of Greece. You know, it was my biggest shock there. I spoke with Varoufakis, maybe you know the story, and he told me that when he pulled his great ace card when talking with Schäuble, the German finance minister, okay, then we'll do Grexit, you know. Right. Schäuble's reaction was, nice, perfect, okay, do it. We can give you 30 billion as the credit to do it and so on. The real conservatives in Europe, they wanted Grexit, and they already had precise plans. Grexit, Hungary, Greece, chaos, okay, people will be taught.
Right, I know. At the time I was saying that I was not for a Greek exit from the EU just because I thought it would actually end up making the conditions in Greece worse, and that, you know, what I thought the only possibility would be is to organize amongst the losers in Europe, you know, the small nations that were struggling and hurt the most by the crisis and that were in debt, that they had to organize together. They couldn't just do it.
I agree with you, but that's crucial. This is also the conclusion of Varoufakis when I talked with him, that the lesson of the failure of Syriza is, one, there is still a dream among some leftists in Europe that since capital is international, a strong nation state gives you enough autonomy, blah, blah, blah. I doubt this. Left also has to be, in some sense, at least internationalist. Yeah. We cannot play nation state against global capital.
Yeah, I agree. Well, listen, it was very nice of you to be on the channel today. And
but we talked too much, so please, I need your comradely censorship. Cut short all stupidities and so on.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.